teaching her a painful lesson about manipulation and consequences. 3:42 p.m. This is the story of Tyler Brooks and his wife Amber Brooks. A woman named Amber submitted this story through our portal about 3 weeks ago, but what arrived instead was something from her husband, Tyler, written the same night she sent hers, apparently, though neither of them knew the other had written in. That detail alone tells you something about where things stood between them. According to Tyler, it started the way most things between them started by then. Not with a fight, but with a silence that had been building for months, the kind that fills a room even when two people are still talking. He wrote, and I'm quoting here, "I didn't answer because I was angry. I didn't answer because I had finally stopped waiting." Here's how he told it, from the beginning the way he remembered it, starting about 8 months before that night. I'll try to explain it the way I remember, not the way I wish it had gone, not the version I've cleaned up for people who ask. The actual version, with all the parts that don't reflect well on me either. The house smelled like her when I came home. That's the first thing I remember about most evenings that year. That particular smell, something between her shampoo and the candle she kept on the kitchen counter, the one she bought from some boutique downtown and replaced religiously every 3 weeks. Cedar and something else, I never learned the name. I should have asked. I didn't. Amber was already on the couch when I walked in, feet tucked beneath her the way she always sat, her phone resting face down on the cushion beside her. She looked up when I came through the door and she smiled, not the wide kind, not the kind from the early years that used to make me feel like I'd done something right just by arriving. A smaller one, the kind that means I see you without quite meaning I'm glad you're here. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself that's just what marriage looked like after 4 years, that the electric smiles were reserved for people you were still trying to impress. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I said back. I put my keys on the hook by the door. She'd installed it, asked me 3 times to hang it properly, and I finally did. And I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water and stood at the counter for a minute looking at nothing in particular. That was our routine by then, not cold, not warm. Just existing in the same space with the comfortable indifference of two people who had memorized each other so thoroughly that the mystery had been replaced by something quieter, something I didn't have a name for yet. I want to be honest about what our marriage was like then, before all of it, because I've noticed that when people tell these kinds of stories, they tend to flatten one person into a villain and one into a victim, and neither of those was really true for us. Amber and I had been good together. We had been genuinely good, not in a performance for other people way, but in a private inside joke, staying up past midnight talking way. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party when I was 28. She was 26. She had this quality I still don't fully know how to describe, something between confidence and restlessness, like she was always slightly ahead of whatever room she was in. I found it magnetic. I still do, honestly. Even now, when I look back, I don't think she was always like this. I think something changed, and I don't know exactly when, and neither does she. We got married after 2 years. Small ceremony. Her parents came, my mother flew in from Portland. It was a good day. The kind of day you carry with you, not because it was perfect, but because the imperfections were yours. The outdoor venue where it rained for exactly 11 minutes during the ceremony, and we both laughed about it. Amber's grandmother getting the vows slightly wrong in her toast, the whole table collapsing into affectionate noise. I loved her completely that day. I want that on the record. But that was 4 years before the evening I'm describing. And 4 years is enough time for the Rain and Laughter version of a person to quietly become someone you've stopped really seeing. Dinner that night was pasta she'd made earlier and reheated. She always cooked on Tuesdays and Thursdays, a system we'd developed, and I did Mondays and Wednesdays. We ate at the kitchen table, which was something we'd agreed on early in our marriage. No phones at dinner, no television. A rule I had pushed for, actually. A rule that by then had started to feel less like connection and more like a meeting with someone I'd scheduled time to check in with. She talked about her day. She worked at an interior design firm. Junior partner by that point, had worked hard to get there, and there was a client who was driving her toward some specific edge of patience, a woman who kept changing her mind about tile selections. Amber described it with this flat, drained energy, not performing frustration, just genuinely tired. I listened. I asked 1 or 2 questions. I think they were the right questions. I can't be certain. What I remember most is that at some point in the middle of her talking, my mind drifted to a work problem I hadn't finished solving, and I came back to her voice mid-sentence and had to reconstruct what we'd been saying from the last few words I'd caught. I nodded. she didn't notice, or maybe she did and had already learned to stop expecting otherwise. That was us by then. Not broken, not dramatic. Just two people who had slowly learned to occupy the same space without fully meeting inside it. The third presence in our marriage, though I only started thinking about it this way later, was Jasmine. Jasmine Cole had been Amber's best friend since college. They'd been roommates for 2 years at Ohio State, had stayed close through moves and jobs, and the general reshuffling that happens in your late 20s. I had nothing technically against Jasmine. She was funny, in a sharp-edged way. She was loyal to Amber in a manner that was absolute and, I came to understand, not always healthy. The kind of loyalty that doesn't question whether the person it's protecting is doing the right thing, just calculates whether the other person is a threat and responds accordingly. Jasmine had been divorced at 29. Her ex-husband, by her telling, was a controlling, emotionally unavailable man who had wasted her best years. I only ever heard his name a few times. I had no way of knowing if that account was accurate. What I did know was that Jasmine had emerged from that experience with a very particular framework for understanding relationships, one in which women who tolerated anything less than complete emotional saturation at all times were women being taken advantage of, and men who failed to provide that saturation were, by definition, suspect. She had never liked me much. She was polite about it. She'd perfected the art of the pleasant expression that didn't quite reach the eyes, but I felt it. The way the room shifted slightly when I entered during one of her visits. The way she and Amber would be mid-conversation, and both would adjust when I appeared. The way you adjust when someone joins a table and you're not interested in including them but can't say so out loud. Amber always dismissed it when I mentioned it. "She's just protective of me," she said once. "She's like that with everyone's partners." I let it go. Letting things go had become something of a habit. That particular Tuesday night, after dinner, Amber mentioned Jasmine was coming to visit that weekend. Not staying over, just coming for Saturday. The way she mentioned it was carefully casual, the kind of casual that's actually the opposite. A tone that means I'm saying this now. Early, so you can't make a big deal of it later. "Okay," I said. "She just needs someone to talk to. She's having a hard time with something." "Okay," I said again. Amber looked at me for a second. Something moved across her face. Maybe she wanted me to say more, ask more, demonstrate some emotional investment in the information she'd just shared. I was looking at my phone, not reading anything important. Just at my phone, the way people are sometimes. She picked up her plate and brought it to the sink. "You don't have to be around if you don't want," she said from the kitchen. "I wasn't planning to disappear," I said. Silence, not angry silence, not hurt silence. The other kind, the kind that is so practiced it barely registers anymore. The kind that two people in a slowly drifting marriage learn to inhabit the way you learn to inhabit a house with a small structural problem. You stop noticing the crack in the wall because it's been there long enough. Later that night, she was already asleep when I came to bed. I lay in the dark for a while listening to her breathe, which had always been one of those small intimacies that didn't require anything from either of us. Easy. Warm. I reached over once and rested my hand near hers without touching it, not sure what I wanted from the gesture. She shifted in her sleep and turned slightly away. I took my hand back. The ceiling was the same ceiling it had always been. I should say now that Amber was not a bad person. I want to be clear about that. She was sharp and intuitive and capable of tremendous warmth when she felt safe enough to show it. She had a way of noticing things, small aesthetic things, the way light landed on a surface, the way a room could feel wrong for reasons you couldn't immediately name, that I always found quietly extraordinary. She brought that to her work, to her friendships, to her best moments in our marriage. She could walk into a space and understand it, could see what it needed. The only place that gift seemed to fail her was with people, specifically with me, specifically in the last year or so, where she had stopped looking closely enough to see what was actually there, and had started replacing observation with assumption. I wasn't sure when that started. I had my theories. Jasmine was part of it, but not all of it, never all of it. What I knew was this: somewhere between the wedding and that Tuesday night, we had both made a series of small choices, not dramatic choices, not choices either of us would point to individually and say that's where it started, that had accumulated into a distance neither of us was talking about. I had retreated into work. She had retreated into Jasmine and the social life they maintained, the brunches and the evening drinks and the long phone calls. We had stopped checking in on each other in the ways that mattered. We had replaced real intimacy with its structural simulacrum. Dinners at the table, keys on the hook, the candle replaced every 3 weeks. I fell asleep eventually. The crack in the wall was still there in the morning. Saturday came. Jasmine arrived at noon with her signature energy, slightly too bright, slightly too sharp, the kind of presence that immediately reorganizes the atmosphere of a room. She hugged Amber at the door and looked past her at me with the pleasant non-smile I'd catalogued over years. "Tyler," she said. Like my name was a mild surprise. "Hey, Jasmine," I said. I spent most of the afternoon in my home office with the door not quite closed, working, genuinely working. A project deadline that week. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't catch pieces of their conversation through the wall. Not enough to reconstruct it, enough to feel its texture. Amber's voice softer than it was with me, more unguarded, the register she used when she felt completely at ease. Jasmine's voice lower and more insistent. That particular cadence of someone who is not asking questions so much as confirming things they already believe. At one point I went to the kitchen to get coffee. They were at the dining table, and they both looked up when I came in. That adjustment, that micro-reconfiguration. Jasmine had her hands wrapped around her mug and was looking at me the way you look at something you're deciding whether to say something about. Amber smiled at me. "You want to join us, do I?" I thought. "Do you want me to?" "I have to finish this thing," I said. "You guys are good." I got my coffee and went back to the office. The adjustment behind me, the conversation resuming, muffled by the wall and the door that wasn't quite closed. That was the thing I didn't understand then. What exactly was being said? What frame was being applied? What version of me and of our marriage was being built sentence by sentence over those hours? I understood it later, not all at once but in pieces, the way understanding arrives when you finally stopped arguing with it. What I knew that Saturday was only this. When Jasmine left at 5 and Amber came back into our shared space, she was different, not dramatically, not in a way I could have pointed to and named, just slightly further away than she'd been that morning. The distance between us, which had been a room, had become something larger, a corridor, the kind with no windows. We watched television that night without talking about it. I remember the particular quality of the silence that night as she lay beside me. Not the practiced silence of routine, something else, more deliberate. The silence of someone who has been given new language for something they already felt and is now testing the weight of it. I lay awake for a long time. Outside, a car passed. Then another. Then nothing. The weeks after Jasmine's visit had a particular quality I'm not sure I can fully describe without sounding like I'm overstating it. Nothing happened. That's the factual account. No fight, no confrontation, no moment I could isolate and say, "There, that's where the ground shifted." What happened instead was a series of absences. Small, accumulating, the kind that don't announce themselves but show up in retrospect like the before and after photos of a slow flood. Amber stopped initiating. Not the large things. Not conversation or plans or the basic architecture of our shared life. The small things. The hand at the small of my back when she passed me in the kitchen. The specific look she used to give me sometimes across a room, not communicating anything in particular, just, "I see you there and I'm glad." The habit she'd had for years of mentioning things she'd read, something funny or strange or beautiful, turning to me first with it the way you turn to the person you've decided is your primary audience. Those things quietly stopped. I noticed. I want to be honest about that. I noticed, and my first response was not to ask about it, but to match it. Whatever she withdrew, I withdrew. I told myself it was self-preservation. Maybe it was also pride. Probably it was both, doing what pride and self-preservation usually do in a marriage that's going sideways, which is to work together under the pretense of protecting you while actually accelerating the distance. We were still functional. That's the strange thing about this kind of drift. It doesn't interrupt the machinery of a life. Dinners still happened. We still talked, still laughed sometimes, still occupied the evenings in a way that would have looked from outside like a normal couple in a normal house. The crack was in the infrastructure, not the facade. Jasmine was visiting more, not constantly, once every 2 weeks, then more reliably, then sometimes twice in a week. Always during the day, always when I was working from home or shortly before I came home, so our overlap was minimal and managed. I noticed the timing and didn't say anything about it because I couldn't say it without sounding like I was cataloging her visits, and I wasn't willing to be the kind of husband who did that out loud. But the effect was visible to me, even if I couldn't document it in any way that would hold up. After Jasmine's visits, Amber was different. Cooler, usually. More internally occupied, like someone who has been given a task they haven't decided how to approach yet. Once or twice she was uncharacteristically sharp with me over small things. The way I loaded the dishwasher, a comment I'd made that she now seemed to have reconsidered and decided was insufficiently considerate. The criticisms were never large enough to fight about. They had the quality of tests, small, deniable, calibrated. I failed some of them, not by responding badly, but by not responding enough, by receiving them with the flat equanimity I'd developed, which I told myself was maturity, and she probably experienced as indifference. There's a particular kind of emotional failure that masquerades as composure. I had mastered it. One evening in late October, maybe 6 weeks after Jasmine's first Saturday visit, Amber and I were doing what we did, existing in the living room in proximity if not in contact. She was on her phone. I was reading. She put the phone down and looked at me for a moment, and I felt the look before I saw it. The specific weight of someone about to say something they've been holding. "Do you ever feel like we're just going through the motions?" she asked. I put the book down, looked at her. The honest answer was yes, sometimes, and I think we've both contributed to that, and I'd like to talk about what we do about it. That was the answer that might have changed the direction of things. What I said instead was, "What do you mean?" Not a deflection exactly, more like a reflex, a request for clarification that was actually a way of buying time while I figured out how to answer without opening something I didn't know how to close. She blinked. Something in her expression shifted. A small flicker, almost imperceptible, like a door swinging and then stopping just before it latches. "I don't know," she said. "Never mind." "No, tell me," I said. "It's nothing. Forget it." She picked up her phone again. The book was still in my lap, but I wasn't reading it. I sat there for a while in the particular frustration of a conversation that had been tried and aborted before it landed anywhere, wanting to rewind 30 seconds and answer differently, and also, and this is the part I'm less proud of, feeling a low, flat resistance to the whole thing, an exhaustion at the idea of what talking about it would require, the excavation, the exposure, the sitting with someone in the discomfort of truth about each other. I picked the book back up. She kept scrolling. Neither of us said anything else that night. I've replayed that moment too many times, more than almost any other single moment in the whole sequence. Not because it was the worst one, it wasn't, not by a distance, but because it was the one where something was still genuinely available, where the conversation she'd been building toward could have been different if I'd been willing to step into it instead of asking her to carry it alone. I wasn't willing. That's the truth. I don't think I was refusing out of cruelty. I think I had been matching her withdrawal for weeks, and had retreated to a place where I was no longer sure what I was supposed to feel, and the uncertainty had calcified into something that functioned like distance, but was actually closer to fear. Fear of saying the thing and having it not be enough, fear of what she'd say back. Fear, this is the hardest one, of finding out that we'd drifted somewhere we couldn't return from, and that asking the question would make that real. So I asked her to clarify instead, and she said, "Never mind," and I picked up the book. The Jasmine situation came to a head, not loudly but with clarity, about 2 weeks after that exchange. I came home on a Thursday to find them both in the kitchen, a bottle of wine open on the counter, the kind of scene that had started to feel like its own category of event in our household. I said hello. Jasmine said hello back. Amber smiled and offered me wine, and I said I was fine, I'd had a long day, I was going to shower and catch up on something. "You could just stay," Amber said. Neutral delivery. Could have meant many things. "I'll be back in a bit," I said. In the shower, I stood under the water longer than I needed to, and had a conversation with myself about whether I was being paranoid, whether the cumulative effect of 6 weeks of observation was a reasonable conclusion or a story I was telling. I wanted to be fair. I've always wanted to be fair. Sometimes to a fault, sometimes to the fault of giving people benefit of the doubt until the doubt was gone completely. I got out of the shower and sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the low murmur of their conversation through the wall. Not words, just tone. And Jasmine's laugh, that particular laugh that had its own frequency, private and knowing, the laugh of someone sharing a conclusion they've already reached. I sat there for a while. Then I went back out and ate dinner I made myself in the kitchen while they moved to the living room, and nobody thought to ask whether I'd eaten. Maybe they assumed. Maybe it didn't occur to them. Maybe I should have said something instead of standing at the counter cutting vegetables with a specific deliberateness, waiting to be noticed. I wasn't noticed. I ate alone at the kitchen table, which we had established a rule about. The table, together, phones away, and which now I was violating because there was no together to violate. Jasmine left at 9. Amber came to the kitchen where I was rinsing dishes and stood in the doorway with an expression I couldn't fully read. Something between guilt and something else. Something more complicated. "You okay?" she asked. "Fine," I said. I'm fine, Amber." She stood there for another second. "Okay," she said. She went to bed. I stayed in the kitchen for a while after, standing at the counter where the cedar candle was nearly burned down, nearly the end of the 3-week cycle. Tomorrow or the next day she'd go downtown and replace it. That ritual would continue regardless of everything else. That, I knew, was reliable. I turned out the kitchen light. I don't know, maybe like share this story or subscribe, I don't know. I'm sorry, that came out weird. I've been writing this for 2 hours, and I'm not sure anyone's going to read it, and I don't know why that matters, but it does. Anyway, back to it. The first time Amber said something that should have been a larger signal than I treated it. The first sentence that I filed under temporary mood instead of information about direction was a Saturday morning 3 weeks later. We were in the car on the way to a thing we did once a month, dinner with her cousin and her cousin's boyfriend. A casual obligation that I generally found neutral and Amber generally found reviving. We were 10 minutes into the drive, some ambient music she'd chosen on the speaker. I was watching the road. She was watching out the passenger window, she said without preamble. Jasmine thinks I've been settling. I kept my eyes on the road. Settling how, I asked. She turned slightly toward me. Not fully. In general. She thinks I gave up things when we got married that I didn't have to give up. I thought about this for a moment. The careful way to respond. The honest way to respond. Like what? I asked. She didn't specify. Silence, the road, the music. Do you think that? I asked eventually. She took a long breath. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if I've just gotten so used to things that I've stopped asking whether I'm happy. And are you happy? She looked out the window again. Are you? I didn't answer right away. The truth was complicated. I was not actively unhappy, but I was aware, constantly aware, of something missing. Some quality of presence. Something warm and specific that I could remember being there and couldn't locate anymore. Most of the time, I said, which was both true and a lie, simultaneously in the way that the most honest things often are. She nodded at the window. We drove the rest of the way mostly in silence, and at dinner she was the version of Amber that other people got, radiant, funny, asking questions, filling the room, and I watched her from across the table and felt something that I struggled to name. Not jealousy, not exactly, more like grief for a version of us I hadn't fully acknowledged losing. We drove home in the same silence. She was asleep before me again. I lay there staring at the ceiling and turned what she'd said over in my mind, settling, gave things up, stopped asking whether I'm happy. And I understood, in the way you understand things that you'd rather not, that Jasmine had been working on her. Not once, not in a single Saturday visit, but in a sustained and patient accumulation, a drip rather than a flood, reframing, recontextualizing, offering a language for dissatisfaction that had slowly replaced whatever language Amber had been using before. I understood this, and I lay there in the dark, and I did not reach over. And neither did she. The text came on a Wednesday. Not the final text, that one came later. This was a Wednesday in late November, and it arrived while I was in a work meeting, a call I was running that required most of my attention, so I saw the notification come in and let it sit. The preview was enough. We need to talk tonight. I finished the call, sat for a moment with my hands flat on the desk. 4 words, no punctuation, the specific cadence of someone who has rehearsed an opening. I texted back, okay, I'll be home by 7. She sent back a single, okay. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a particular quality of waiting. Not dread, exactly. More like the feeling before a storm, when the pressure changes in the air, and the light goes a specific shade of yellow, and everything is still completely normal except that you know. I came home at 6:53. She was in the kitchen, not cooking, just standing near the counter. The cedar candle was the new one. She'd replaced it. Same scent, clean wick. It threw a small circle of warm light across the tile. She'd changed after work, was in a sweatshirt and jeans, her hair down. She looked tired. Hey, I said, keys on the hook. Hey. She turned to face me, and there it was. That expression I'd been peripherally tracking for months, finally assembled into its clearest form. Not anger, not cruelty. Something quieter and more considered. The face of someone who has arrived at a position they intend to hold. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she said. Okay, I said. I didn't move to the counter. I stayed near the doorway, which in retrospect I recognize as a physical version of the same posture I'd been taking for months, not fully entering. Keeping a certain distance. Old habit, newly literal. I don't think we're good for each other anymore, she said. I haven't for a while. It landed the way those things land. Not with the force of a surprise, but with the weight of a thing that's been true for a while and is now spoken, which is its own different impact. Since when, I asked. I don't know exactly. Longer than I've been willing to say. And Jasmine thinks this too? Something moved across her face, a flash of defensiveness. Then something that might have been guilt, Then the careful, neutral expression she reassembled over it. "This isn't about Jasmine," she said. "I know she's been. Tyler, this is about us, not her." I exhaled through my nose, not a sigh, not quite, something slower. "Okay," I said. "Then tell me about us," she told me. "I'm going to try to relay it as accurately as I can without making it something it wasn't." What she said was, she felt unseen. She felt like she had been trying, in her own ways, which she acknowledged were not always direct, to reach across the distance between us, and finding that I wasn't reaching back. She felt like she'd become someone I was comfortable around rather than someone I was engaged with. She said the dinner table rule felt hollow now, like a form without a function. She said she couldn't remember the last time I had asked her something and actually been curious about the answer. Some of this was true. I want to be clear about that. Some of it was accurate in ways I had to sit with. Not the characterization that I was simply unavailable or didn't care, because I did care. I had just lost the habit of demonstrating it in forms she could recognize. But the core of it, the distance, the not reaching back, the questions asked by reflex rather than by genuine wanting to know, that was real. And some of it was Jasmine's language, dressed in Amber's voice. I could hear the frame, the settling, the gave things up, the evaluation of our life through a lens that had been loaned to her and that she had adopted without fully examining. I didn't say that. I was tired of not saying things, but I was also tired of starting a fight that would derail whatever this actually was. "I hear you," I said. "Some of what you're describing, you're right. I've been absent. I haven't been asking. That's true." She looked at me as if she'd expected more resistance and didn't know what to do with agreement. "But I also think," I continued carefully, "that this has been happening to both of us, that we've both been withdrawing, and that it didn't start with either of us specifically, and that the thing to do about it, if you want to do something about it, is to be in it together. Not one person presenting evidence and the other defending." "I'm not accusing you," she said. "I know you're not. I'm just saying I'm not the only one who's been absent." Silence. The candle threw its small, warm light. "I know that," she said, quieter. "So what do you want to do?" I asked. She looked at her hands for a moment, then at me. "I don't know," she said. And I believed her. That "I don't know" was the most genuine thing she'd said in the entire conversation. Not rehearsed, not borrowed from anyone else's framework. Just her uncertain, standing in the kitchen with her hair down and a new cedar candle burning behind her. "Okay," I said. "Okay? I mean, if you don't know, then we don't make any decisions tonight. We sit with it." She looked at me for a long moment. "You're very calm," she said. "I've been thinking about it for a while too," I said. That landed. I could see it land. The realization that I had also been carrying this, that the quiet I'd maintained hadn't been obliviousness, but something more chosen than that. She looked, briefly, like she wasn't sure how to recalibrate. "I need some space," she said then. I'm not saying anything permanent. I need some space to think without it being a conversation." "That's fine," I said. "You're not going to argue with me?" "No, why not?" I looked at her. "Because I've been arguing with the version of you that existed 6 months ago in my head, and I'm tired. Because I don't know who taught you to speak about our marriage in this language, but I'd like you to find your own again. Because I love you, and I am also, underneath everything, genuinely exhausted. Because if you need space," I said, "then you need space. I'm not going to perform devastation to convince you to stay." Something crossed her face that I couldn't read. Then she nodded, slowly. She went to bed. I stayed in the kitchen. I sat with it. The candle burned. The text came 5 days later. By that point, she had spent 2 of those days at Jasmine's. She told me she was going. I'd said okay. She'd looked at me like she wasn't sure what to do with the okay, and had been back for 2 days that were mostly quiet, mostly careful, a kind of negotiated proximity where we existed in the house without directly addressing anything. I gave her the space she'd asked for. I didn't crowd her. I went to work and came home and cooked dinner twice and didn't require anything. I can see now that she may have experienced that as further evidence of detachment. That's the particular cruelty of this kind of dynamic. The same behavior can be either respect or indifference depending on where you're standing when you interpret it. She texted at 7:14 in the evening. I was in the living room and she was upstairs, a physical distance that had started to feel like a metaphor that didn't need unpacking. The message read, "I've been thinking about it, and I think this isn't working. I don't want to keep doing this. Don't call me again." I read it 3 times. There's a specific quality to the moment when someone does something that once done cannot be entirely undone. Not because of the content, not because the relationship is necessarily over, not because the words are irreversible, but because of the method. The choice to send a text rather than walk downstairs. the management of distance into digital, the clean, cold finality of "don't call me again" from someone who was 60 feet away on the floor above mine. I thought about what it meant. I thought about the last 5 days, and the 5 months before them, and the 4 years before those. I thought about Jasmine's laugh through the wall, and the dinner table where I'd eaten alone, and the question in the car, "Are you happy?" and the ceiling I'd stared at more times than I could count. I thought about reaching back, and I realized, sitting there with the phone in my hand and her message glowing on the screen, that I had been reaching back, in my own way, in the way available to me, for a long time, and that it had not been enough, and that I was no longer able to reach any further without something to reach toward. I typed back, "Don't come home either, sent." Put the phone face down on the cushion. Sat very still, the calls came one after another. I watched the phone light up from where I'd placed it face down on the cushion, felt the vibration pulse through the fabric beneath my hand. I counted them without moving. 10, 15, 20. I didn't answer because I had nothing to say, not a strategy, not to make a point. The text hadn't been a move. I had responded because it was true, and now I had said it, and I had nothing to add to the truth. I heard her upstairs movement, then the stairs. She came into the living room and stood there, and her expression was not what I would have expected. Not anger. Something more exposed. The face of someone who had pushed a door expecting it to open inward and found it opening outwards instead. The whole frame of what she'd assumed would happen, gone. "Are you serious?" she said. I said. "Tyler, you told me not to call you," I said. "I respected that. I'm asking you to respect the other half." She stood very still. "You're kicking me out," she said. "I'm taking you at your word. You said this isn't working. You said you don't want to keep doing this." "I'm not going to pretend I didn't hear it." "I was." She stopped. Something shifted in her face. "Quieter. I needed you to fight for it." I looked at her for a long moment. "I know," I said. And I did know. The text had been a test, the largest in a long series of them, the one designed to be impossible to pass cleanly. Call her back, and I was chasing, which confirmed a certain story. Agree, and I was indifferent, which confirmed another one. Either way, the conclusion had been written before the message was sent. "I've been fighting for it," I said. "For months. In the way I know how. Maybe not in the way you need it, but it was real." She opened her mouth, closed it. "What I can't do," I said, "is keep performing for a test I can't see. Keep trying to find the right response to a question I'm never shown. Keep reaching in a way that meets someone else's criteria for what reaching looks like. This isn't about Jasmine," she said. "Tell me one decision you've made about us in the last 2 months that doesn't have her fingerprints on it," I said quietly. A long silence. She sat down at the other end of the couch, pulled her knees up, feet tucked beneath her, that particular posture I knew as well as I knew anything. She looked at her phone and then at the wall and then at nothing. "She went through something painful," Amber said. "She just wanted to help me." "I know what she went through," I said. "I'm genuinely sorry for it. But her marriage to her ex-husband is not ours. Whatever happened between them, that's not what's been happening here. Or it wasn't, before she started explaining it to you in those terms." Amber looked at me then, full eye contact, the kind we hadn't had in months. "Some of what you said earlier, distance the not reaching back." I said, "I own it. I've been absent in the ways you described. That's real. But some of what you're describing is also what happens when someone has been slowly convinced that what they have isn't enough before they've honestly asked whether it is." The room was very quiet. The cedar candle threw its small circle of light across the kitchen tile. New one, I noticed. She'd just replaced it. "What do you want?" she asked, quietly. "I want us to be honest with each other," I said. "Not through anyone else. Just us, saying the actual thing." She looked at her hands. "I think you should stay somewhere else for a while," I said. "I mean that without any hostility. I think we both need to be somewhere that isn't this room, asking ourselves separately what we actually want. Not what we've been told to want. What we actually want." She looked up at me, checking whether I meant it. I did. "Okay," she said. "It was safe upstairs." I heard the particular sounds of packing, drawers, a zipper, the weight of movement above the ceiling, and sat in the quiet of the living room and didn't move. 40 minutes later, she came down with a bag over her shoulder, stood in the hallway. "I'm going to Jasmine's," she said. "Okay," I said. She waited. I think she wanted me to add something. I didn't. "Tyler," she said. "I'll be here," I said. "When you're ready to talk. Actually talk. I'll be here." She held my gaze for a moment. Then she left. The door closed behind her with an ordinary sound. A normal door, a normal departure. In a moment that was neither. I sat in it. 6 weeks passed. I went to work. I ran in the mornings, something I hadn't done in over a year. I called my mother twice and didn't tell her the full shape of things, and she heard everything I wasn't saying and had the grace not to push. I want to be honest about those weeks, including the parts that weren't clean. There were nights I replayed the whole sequence and arrived at a version where I had been too cold, too withholding, where my composure had been a form of punishment dressed as restraint. I sat in those nights. I stopped defending myself to myself, which is harder than it sounds and more necessary than I'd admitted. What I understood gradually was that I had contributed to the drift in ways that were real and mine to own. The emotional withdrawal, the habit of matching her distance with more distance, the questions asked by reflex rather than genuine curiosity, those had cost us something. I could hold Jasmine's influence alongside that truth without letting one cancel out the other. Both were real. Both required something from me. Amber, I gathered through our minimal contact, was in a different process. Still inside the reframe, still finding ways to arrange the narrative that felt manageable. I understood the impulse. When someone has handed you a framework that makes your unhappiness someone else's primary fault, it is very difficult to give it back, because giving it back means admitting you participated in building the problem. That admission doesn't come quickly or easily, especially when you have someone nearby confirming the simpler version. I didn't call her. I'd meant what I said. I'd be here when she was ready. But I wasn't going to reach any further into a space that wasn't reaching back. 3 weeks in, she texted. I've been thinking about what you said. I waited a day before responding. I've been thinking too. Let me know when you want to talk in person. Actually talk, she replied. Okay. She came home 3 weeks after that. No announcement, no dramatic return. A Sunday morning text. Coming home today if that's okay. I said it was. She arrived at 2 with her duffel bag and the look of someone who had been through something and was not yet out the other side of it, but was walking in the right direction. I made tea. We sat at the kitchen table. She told me she'd started seeing a therapist, not at Jasmine's suggestion, her own choice, made deliberately. That mattered to me. I didn't make it dramatic. I just noted it. She said she'd been thinking about her own pattern. The way she'd outsourced her internal processing to Jasmine rather than working through it herself or bringing it to me. The way she'd let someone else's unresolved grief about her own marriage become the lens through which ours was being examined. She said it hadn't been conscious. I believed her. She said she was sorry. I said I was sorry too. We sat with that for a while, not rushing it into resolution before it had finished being felt. I don't want to go back to how it was, she said. Neither do I said. I want something different from both of us. She looked at me. Me too, she said. The tea went cold. Neither of us moved to reheat it. 4 months after the night of the missed calls, we were at a party together. Amber's colleague's birthday. Jasmine was there. I'd known she would be. Amber had mentioned it without managing my reaction to it, which itself was new and worth noticing. Jasmine saw us come in. I watched the calibration move across her face, that adjustment I'd cataloged over years. She hugged Amber warmly. She said hello to me. Tyler, she said. Jasmine, I said. We didn't hug. There was a moment where it might have been expected, and we both let it pass without acknowledging the passing. And then other people intervened, and the moment dissolved into the noise of the party. I watched her across the room over the next hour. She laughed and talked and held her wine glass and was, by every visible measure, the same Jasmine she'd always been. What I felt watching her was not what I'd expected to feel, not hostility, not the sharp-edged thing I'd carried for months. Something more complicated and less satisfying. Something closer to understanding, which is not the same as forgiveness but moves in that direction. She had been lonely. That was the root of it, I think. The divorce had left her with a grief she hadn't finished processing and a framework built around that grief. And Amber, who loved her, who wanted to be there for her, had made herself available to inhabit that framework without examining what she was stepping into. Jasmine wasn't a villain. She was a person in pain doing what people in pain often do, making the world legible through the structure of that pain and finding company in the making. That didn't mean it hadn't cost us something. It had. But it was ours to repair, not hers. At some point I went to refill my drink and found myself standing beside her at the bar. One of those small environmental coincidences you can't avoid at a party. We waited in the brief, negotiated quiet of two people who don't have much to say, but are physically close enough that silence requires a kind of acknowledgement. She seems good, Jasmine said, not looking at me, looking at Amber across the room who was laughing at something someone had said. She is, I said. A pause. I know you don't hold me in especially high regard, she said. I looked at her. I don't hold you in low regard either, I said. I mean that. You went through something painful, and Amber loves you and wanted to be there. I don't hold that against either of you. She glanced at me then, a brief, searching look, trying to determine whether the statement was genuine or merely diplomatic. I let her look. I was just trying to protect her, she said. I know, I said. I took my drink and went back across the room. Amber had seen us. She raised an eyebrow, small, private. Fine, I said quietly. She nodded. On the drive home, the city lights moved past the windows, and Amber had her hand resting on the center console, not holding mine, just placed there, available. I reached over and put my hand over hers. She turned it and laced her fingers through mine. Neither of us spoke for a while. I've been thinking about that night, she said. The text. You don't have to. I want to. A pause. I sent it because I wanted you to fight. I wanted you to call and push through it and prove something. And when you just said don't come home either, the ground dropped out. I called 20 times. I don't even fully remember doing it. I just panicked. I know, I said. Were you angry when you sent it? I thought about that night. The phone face down on the cushion, the quiet of the room, the particular quality of having finally genuinely run out of performance. Not angry, I said. Just done. Not done with you. Done with the version of things we were living. Done waiting for the test I couldn't see to be over. She was quiet for a moment. I didn't realize I was testing you, she said. I think I genuinely didn't. I know that too, I said. The city lights thinned as we got closer to home. Less concentrated, more scattered. I kept her hand in mine and drove, and didn't say anything, and she didn't say anything. And the silence between us had a quality I'd spent almost a year missing, without being able to name it. The quality of two people being in the same place at the same time. Not just adjacent, actually there. I let it go too far, she said. The Jasmine thing. I let it become something it shouldn't have been. We both did things, I said. That's the honest account. She laughed, just barely, just the shape of it. You and your honest accounts. Is that annoying? No, she said. It's one of the things I forgot I valued. We started seeing a couples therapist in January. It wasn't easy. Those sessions asked me to do something I'd been avoiding for years. Sit in a room and put language to the interior experience of things I'd been navigating through silence and distance. I wasn't naturally suited to it. Amber was better at it than I was at first. She'd had more practice recently. I caught up. What I learned is still something I'm learning. That the composed equanimity I'd mistaken for maturity had been a very efficient wall. That I had kept Amber at a specific remove for reasons rooted in my own fear of what being seen would expose. That the distance had not appeared from nowhere. I had helped construct it, plank by plank, with every question I'd deflected and every feeling I'd managed rather than expressed. I say that not to indict myself. I say it because it's what's true, and because the honest account requires it. The thing I keep returning to is the night itself, the text. The 20 calls I didn't answer, the door closing. I think about what would have happened if I'd called back. If I'd answered one of those calls, said come downstairs, let's talk, pulled her back before the 45 minutes of packing. I could have. The part of me that loves her, which has never disappeared, not through any of it, wanted to close the distance in the most immediate way possible. But I think if I had, we would have patched it. The way we'd been patching things for a year, efficiently, without excavation, in the way that gets you through the night but doesn't change the wall. 6 months later, or a year, we'd have been back in the same place. Wider, more entrenched, less able to name it. The 20 missed calls were the first time I understood she was actually afraid. Not performing, actually afraid of losing something she hadn't, until that moment, fully measured. And it was only because I didn't answer, not as punishment, not as calculation, but because I was finally out of performances, that the measuring could happen. That's the thing I'd want someone to hear in all of this. Not advice, not a strategy. Just this. The moment I stopped managing her reaction and told her the plain truth of where I was. Don't come home either. Something real became possible for the first time in a long time. Not because the truth was hard, because it was mine, and she heard it. We still do the dinner table rule. No phones. Together. It doesn't feel hollow anymore. The cedar candle is still on the kitchen counter. She still replaces it every 3 weeks. I know its name now, I asked. It's called Still Life. I'm not going to make a point of that. Some things you just let sit.